Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. I'm Adam Dietrich, a Vice President at CloudResearch, and today we're going to explore how bots, inattentive respondents, and naysayers affected one of 2020's biggest stories, a June report from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention on the alarming amount of Americans gargling bleach, household cleaners, or engaging in other high-risk practices to avoid COVID-19. We'll explore how it happened and what you can do to prevent your data sets from being infected in the future. But before we dig into that, I want to give a brief introduction of my co-presenters today. Joining me to explore the day-to-day implications for your online research is Chris Biviano, also a Vice President at CloudResearch. He's a market research industry veteran with experience across the online panel landscape. And to walk through the data is Dr. Leib Littman, CloudResearch's co-founder and chief research officer. Leib's expertise is in research methods and online sampling, with a background in cognitive and experimental psychology. We're all from CloudResearch, a leading respondent supplier platform that helped to remove bad actors from academia's largest sample supplier, Mechanical Turk. We've spent the last few years developing an innovative approach that leverages the standards of academic research with the technology and efficiencies of corporate research to clean up data quality across the entire online research ecosystem. And now that you know a little bit about us, let's dig into the study with Chris.
Thanks, Adam. In June of last year, the CDC released a report titled Knowledge and Practices Regarding Safe Household Cleaning and Disinfection for COVID-19 Prevention, to better understand the cleaning practices amongst Americans in response to the COVID-19 virus. This is obviously an important topic of research for healthcare organizations, as understanding health practices is fundamental in pandemic control and providing behavioral guidelines to help curtail the outbreak. The study was conducted by the CDC in cooperation with a research and public opinion firm using an online marketplace to source participants. So let's dig into the questionnaire and some of the results. The questions in their survey ranged from knowledge about safety, for example, which of the following have you heard is true about using household cleaning products such as bleach or Lysol, to individual practices of using cleaning products within the respondent household, such as in the past month, which of the following cleaning behaviors have you or a household member engaged in to prevent coronavirus? So what did the CDC report find among their questions? On the first questions of what respondents knew to be true about safe practices, they found that roughly 70% of the population knew to keep cleaning products away from children and to properly ventilate when using said products. They also reported that around 60% knew to store hand sanitizer away from children. These numbers seemed low, especially when combined with 6% of respondents claiming not to know any of the relatively common safety practices. And it was a signal to us of disengaged respondents or fraudulent respondents randomly selecting answers. But the loudest signal pointing to issues of fraudulent respondents appears when we look at an alarming 39% stating that they had engaged in practices like washing food with bleach, gargling or drinking household cleaner, and other acts that seemed unlikely on the scale of tens of millions of people. These results prompted them to note risks of severe tissue damage and injury possible from these practices. The CDC also noted a strong correlation between people that reported engaging in these behaviors and experiencing adverse health effects like headaches and stomach aches, and suggested a need for a public messaging campaign. Naturally, when we saw these results and the conclusions, we wondered, what were the threats to the data quality in the study? How were those threats handled? And is the finding valid? Our curiosity about this data was so strong, we decided to replicate the study with and without data quality controls. And we'll return to some of those striking insights we uncovered a bit later, but first, to explore how the data and their summaries were reported and took on a life of their own, I'll turn it back over to Adam.
Thanks, Chris. As you all likely know, the findings about potential widespread usage of household cleaning products became a very big story. On that Friday evening in June, local news outlets began with their segments highlighting the report. Over the weekend, national print and television outlets covered the study, as hundreds of thousands of social media users across the globe shared the information as well as their opinions. By the following Monday, foreign leaders were being asked to weigh in about whether they thought bleach or other disinfectants should be a part of the COVID treatment plan. Here's a quick snippet of how quickly that data traveled.
in an effort to stop the coronavirus. So that whole thing has not gone away. The CDC did a survey. They found 39% of people questioned admitted to incorrectly using bleach. 19% say they washed their food with it. 18% said they used it on their skin.
Gargling with things like bleach. What is some of the new information and guidance that we're getting?
Food, inhaled it, even washed their body with it. Other cleaning products too, and some disinfectants.
It surveyed more than 500 people, and about 39% admitted to incorrectly using bleach and other cleaners and disinfectant solutions. This includes washing their food with bleach and using it on their skin.
People should be injecting themselves with bleach to kill COVID-19.
Don't think I need to comment on that, Prime Minister.
No,
Thanks to New Zealand and the Kiwis for adding a bit of levity there at the end, but it was a truly massive story leveraging online research data. In fact, Altmetric, a data science firm that tracks and measures where research is mentioned online, ranks it in the top 5 percentile of all time for research that's shared online, and in the 99th percentile for engagement across news, blogs, and social media. But what was the problem? As in any online research study, a combination of acquiescence bias, inattention, and mischievous responding, all factors that have been extensively documented to bias surveys both in and outside of online opt-in panels, can severely bias the estimates of such behaviors. To newspaper and television news editors, they were simply sharing the findings from the world's preeminent experts on public health and disease prevention, but we turned our eye to determining if this study may have been influenced, particularly on the question of high-risk practices, by problematic respondent bias. Additionally, we saw this widely publicized report as an opportunity to portray complacency and sample scrutiny. As Chris mentioned, we refielded the study to address these issues using the exact same questions provided in the report, but installed the data quality measures that we've developed and validated over the past few years into a product we call SENTRY. The full text of our replication study and findings was published on medRxiv, a depository for health sciences research. And we'll share a link to that report as the presentation wraps up. But to share some more information about the tools we used and the underlying research tenets that helped develop them, I'll turn it over to Labe.
Thank you, Adam. So over the last 10 years, certain technology-based protections have become commonplace, while other developments are less frequently used. Our tool, called SENTRY, combines several approaches, including traditional IP deduplication and digital fingerprinting defenses that you're likely familiar with behavioral approaches that we developed and that we believe are critical to use in conjunction with the more traditional approaches. SENTRY also leverages an event streamer, which collects data around cursor movements to identify bot-like behavior, as well as browser language settings and translation apps to identify and remove respondents who aren't comfortable in the survey language. SENTRY is a short 35-second protection system that is situated before the survey, and it routes respondents who pass to the client survey, but routes respondents who fail back to the supplier with a quality term. But before describing SENTRY in more detail, I want to start with a few words about data quality in general. This will help to set the stage for a discussion of the tools that we've built into SENTRY in order to combat bad data, and for the need of those tools to use multiple instruments that each address different kinds of a problematic respondent. So most broadly, what do we mean by bad data quality? When we talk about bad data quality, we're talking about data that can be trusted. When thinking about data quality, we ask the following question: does the information provided by respondents accurately reflect their thoughts, feelings, and behaviors? We generally see 3 types of respondents who we call problematic. The first type of respondent is the speedster. These respondents tend to speed through surveys. They're generally inattentive, disengaged, and provide responses that are random. Their open-ended responses are typically either of very low quality or incoherent or absent altogether. A second type of problematic participant provides wrong or misleading information. Sometimes this happens intentionally, such as when they're taking a survey they're not really qualified to take. For example, they might pretend to be a financial manager to qualify for the survey. At other times, they engage in yay-saying, or what is also sometimes called acquiescence bias, which inflates point estimates and introduces illusory correlations between unrelated events. The third type of problematic respondent is the bot. And this may be a human being using some kind of computer code to answer parts of surveys, or it may be a bot that grabs and completes studies in their entirety. When not dealt with properly, these types of problematic respondents can completely invalidate the results of studies. In the CDC study, for example, both inattentive respondents who respond randomly to questions and yaysayers who systematically say yes to everything can artificially increase the number of yes responses to questions such as the ones that ask people whether they drink bleach. So the goal of SENTRY is to route these kinds of problematic respondents out of the survey before they have the chance to introduce noise and systematic bias into a data set. But different types of problematic respondents require specific approaches that are tailored to them. Instruments that catch inattentive respondents, for example, will not catch people who are paying attention but are consistently acquiescing to most or all questions. For this reason, one of the goals of our system is to incorporate measures that provide protection against many different types of problematic participants. So let's talk about the meat and potatoes of SENTRY. SENTRY has several different types of validated instruments to detect and route problematic respondents out of surveys. Some of the instruments are optimized for identifying noise, which comes from inattentiveness and lack of comprehension, and other measures are optimized for detecting acquiescence bias. Yet other measures are optimized for detecting fraud, including bots. And so first, we'll focus on the measures that are optimized for reducing noise, which comes from inattentiveness and lack of comprehension. We call these SENTRY association questions. The one on the screen here asks participants what word is most associated with discover. And as anyone who is paying attention and can speak English will tell you, the answer is find. These questions are created using AI, which uses a semantic network model approach. Our AI crawls through corpora of millions of English language texts and creates word associations with different connection weights to create large libraries of questions of this type. We developed this approach because the background of our research team is in studying cognition, memory, and learning. And one of the most fundamental things these sciences have taught us is that we live and learn by making associations between the things that we experience around us. This includes making associations between words, and by the time someone has spent a couple of years living, hearing, seeing, and speaking, we all have a well-developed network of associations, which includes a basic framework that we share with others in society about what words and concepts are associated with each other. These associations that people have are quantified by our associative semantic network models, which are based in corpora of millions of articles and conversations. We then take this information and use it to generate the questions that are incorporated into SENTRY. These questions are then tested and validated by our team, and we have developed and tested thousands of these types of measures, and now have a very large library of validated association questions. The extensive testing our team does is to make sure that these questions are in the appropriate spot of difficulty and are calling the right kinds of participants. We do this in order to minimize any kind of bias to the demographic of respondents who pass and fail these types of questions, and to make sure the non-problematic respondents can actually get all these questions correct. SENTRY uses both multiple choice and open-ended association questions. The open-ended questions are automatically scored by our AI system using these associative network models in a fraction of a second to further identify only respondents who provide sensible open-ended responses. Association questions are one kind of question we have in SENTRY. There are also other questions that are geared toward catching specific response styles that these questions are positioned to defend against, such as yay-saying. And to demonstrate the importance of addressing the problem of yay-saying, we incorporated several questions into the replication survey itself, which we'll get to when discussing the results of our study. So let's take a look at SENTRY in action. What does a participant see? Here's a video captured automatically by SENTRY of a participant passing through the system. First, participants see instructions, and then a short series of stimuli. SENTRY monitors and analyzes the way respondents navigate through the system to detect and remove fraudulent and suspicious bot-like behavior while also preventing duplication. SENTRY has tech built in while collecting behavioral and psychologically meaningful data. And on the tech side, you can see we capture the mouse movements. And if you noticed on the bar in the bottom of the video, events such as copying and pasting and going off the screen are automatically noted and can be used to catch fraudulent respondents. So that is some of the technology that SENTRY uses alongside digital fingerprinting, reCAPTCHA, and location verification technology. It's this potent mix of tech and diagnostic psychological measures that make SENTRY good at maximizing data cleanliness and for detecting respondents who are problematic. And so with that, let's come back to the CDC study and see how problematic respondents that were identified by SENTRY contaminated their data set and created illusory effects. So we replicated their study using the exact same methodology just a few weeks later. We used the exact same data collection platform for sourcing participants, the same survey instruments, and the same study design as in the original study. The only differences were that in our study, respondents were routed to SENTRY, where they were categorized either as problematic respondents if they failed SENTRY, or as non-problematic respondents if they passed SENTRY. We additionally included several questions to demonstrate the importance of controlling for yay-sayers, and these questions included, quote, do you eat concrete for its iron content for breakfast? And another question, quote, have you ever had a fatal heart attack? These questions were incorporated into the survey itself. And after completing SENTRY, all respondents were routed to the survey, including those who were categorized as problematic, so that we can compare their responses. And so now for the data, what did we actually find? So across the entire sample, we found the exact same rates of reported dangerous cleaning practices as did the CDC report. In other words, prior to taking problematic respondents out of the analytic sample, we found exactly what they found, that people report engaging in dangerous cleaning practices at a very high rate. However, we also found that all kinds of impossible events were reported at the same rate as dangerous cleaning practices. For example, 4% of people reported having a fatal heart attack, and 6% said that they eat concrete. These are all examples of the type of inattentiveness and acquiescence bias that we discussed earlier. And it shows that online survey data cannot be taken at face value unless problematic respondents are removed from the data set first. When 6% of people report eating concrete for breakfast, that pretty much means that problematic respondents can make any event appear as though it is real. When problematic respondents that were identified by SENTRY were taken out of the analytic sample, we found that fully over 90% of all dangerous cleaning practices were reported by these problematic respondents. Here's a graph that shows the differential rate at which problematic and non-problematic respondents report dangerous cleaning practices. And here we'll just focus on the 3 practices all the way at the right of the graph, which include drinking soap, drinking cleaner, and drinking bleach. Each of these practices was reported at a rate of 15% by respondents flagged by SENTRY, but by about 0.5% by those who passed SENTRY. Indeed, across all 3 of these questions, 30% of respondents reported engaging in at least one of them who were flagged by SENTRY as being problematic, whereas those people who were flagged as being non-problematic, the rate was at about 1%. Upon further examination, we also found that some people misunderstood some of the questions, and when taking all of that into account, we actually found no evidence at all that people were drinking bleach for protection against COVID infection. We additionally found that when problematic respondents were removed from the analytic sample, the correlation between dangerous cleaning practices and adverse health outcomes disappeared entirely, meaning it was no longer statistically significant. In the original CDC study, this correlation was very high. But it turns out that it was driven entirely by acquiescence bias coming from problematic respondents. The correlation between dangerous cleaning practices and adverse health effects like stomach aches and headaches was the basis for CDC's suggestion that public health interventions in the form of public service announcements were needed to prevent these practices. But as it turns out, such interventions may not be warranted in light of the current findings. Overall, our findings demonstrate something that has been known for a very long time, that problematic respondents can invalidate the conclusions of research studies. We also show that researchers can use tools that are very effective at automatically routing problematic respondents out of surveys. And with that, I turn it over to Adam for some concluding remarks.
Thanks, Labe, and thanks to all of you for joining us. We understand that most researchers in attendance today are likely using some form of multi-factor data protection, probably for your online studies, probably by combining whatever duplication software may be offered on your platform alongside red herrings or attention checks in your survey. But we hope that this presentation has shown that bots and fraudulent respondents are becoming more sophisticated and more difficult to detect with traditional methods. We developed SENTRY to address all of those kinds of needs for cutting edge bot defenses like digital fingerprinting and event streamer that we outlined before, alongside a revolving library of over 1,000 validated measures to keep bad actors from ever entering your study. Moreover, as we've tested the system across millions of respondents, we've been able to keep demographic consistency with sample source rather than eliminating the lower income or lower education participants that are often disproportionately removed via mid-survey red herrings. So if you'd like to know more about CloudResearch and SENTRY, we have a digital booth and we'll be sticking around after this presentation to answer any inquiries. But our aim is to continue developing these tools alongside you, the research community, to prevent future headlines featuring inaccurate data. So once again, thank you for joining us today. And with that, we'll turn it over to questions.